should affirm the recommendations in terms of where we're heading in terms of the approach. What I'm wondering is where would we be if we simply initiated the rulemaking? Because one of the concerns I had as I read through that is that we've got to get standards. Seems to be, in my mind, we need to get standards settled. We need to figure out what the assessment tool is so we can run the statistical analysis so that we can definitively say that the 8F model is going to do the very things that we hope meets the panel's recommendations in that report. So I just wondered, in terms of a motion, rather than us voting up or down on the recommendations, is there wisdom in one affirming those recommendations, two, since there is an MOU in place through December 31, resolving that motion that we're going to continue to work directly with the panel as we work through that, and do that then, I guess, three, in the context of initiated rulemaking, so we have that window to get those things in order.
Well, let's clarify what our role is here.
Okay.
First of all, what we have recommendations from the panel. And then we received last evening, quite late, recommendations from your staff. So what we have before us is recommendations from the staff, which I'm not sure is totally appropriate. We're supposed to be working on the recommendations by the panel. However, having read through the recommendations on page 5 and 6, and I would stop where it begins to talk about ESEA flexibility waiver and standards and assessments and so on. The very first part of that, my staff reviewed this morning, and there's a couple of things I'd like to point out, and if you all have that in front of you, I think this is good conversation that we have. The very first portion of this, and let me get my page where I actually made my notes. I've got too many of them. Oh, thank you. On the first page, it says the board affirms the panel's accountability framework concept subject to additional discussions about the impact of the panel's state assessments, recommendations, statistical analysis, validation using Indiana data, and goes on really pretty much to say what the panel said it was going to be doing. And then it talks about extending the MOU to have the panel continue work with that regard. On November 15th, that portion right there, the board has already filed the intent to begin rulemaking. You did that in August. So the intent to file is already there, so we don't need to do that on November 15th. And I would invite board staff to check that out. I believe we already did that in August, put forth the intent to file. Starting on November 14, we read through these recommendations. I would just really recommend a word change. It refers to growth to standard, and in the statute it says growth to proficiency, and I think we should use the same language that is used in statute so there's no confusion about what it is that we're working on. And that's a couple of places. That's in phase 1 of the model revisions and in phase 2 of the model revisions. We are in support of actually the panel working through phases and making recommendations and working with you regarding that. For the revisions, we know we have a lot of work to do. I mean, Sarah's point is spot on. We have work to do, and I think it's prudent for us to be sure to have a plan in which that happens and how that happens. So we have basically in January 8 on that bullet point right there. I'm not sure the board staff is appropriate to bring recommendations. The panel would be appropriate to bring recommendations.
May I speak just for a second?
Sure, you may,
Brad.
Brad.
We're in a time of discussion. I exercise my own independent mind when I read a report, but I also evaluate what is submitted to me, and I guess I don't understand the dismissiveness of the staff's analysis on this. When we were here on last Friday, I specifically remember you reaching out to Claire, so I don't quite get that. But that being set aside, I think my interest, and I would love to hear from my colleagues on the board, I want to get it right. We've had so many teachers express to us frustration over the current model. We have recommendations from a panel that has had 7 weeks to work on it and a board that's had less than 7 days to digest it. I think Tony Walker said it right on Friday. We don't have enough here to say we have a model. We have the beginning framework for a model, and I would be comfortable affirming that framework. And I don't know. I apologize. if we initiated the rulemaking process, I'd like to know what that timeline looks like now, since we initiated it in August. But if there is a pathway for us to take a collective deep breath, be in compliance with what the legislator asked us to do, I don't understand what the harm is in saying, let's initiate the rulemaking process, continue the dialogue between the board and the panel, because we've not had a chance really, other than one meeting, I had a chance to ask you, Dr. Yeager, a few questions, but I've heard from other panelists who are saying we've had great concerns, we've had few concerns. I've heard different. I would love to have that chance to interact as a board member with the panel so that we get it right. And then in the backdrop of all that is still the larger question of what are our standards going to be, which dictates what the assessment's going to look like, which ultimately plays into how we calculate A to F. So I don't want to get sidebarred with where the analysis came from. If throw it out that came from Claire. In my own analysis of that, and I'll defer to my other colleagues on the board, I think that's a reasonable pathway if it keeps us compliant with what the General Assembly asks us to do, which is to get it right, and that's what I'm asking.
So Brad, are you suggesting that the actual motion today be to initiate rulemaking?
I will profess to you, I don't recall. I mean, I remember the meeting we did like 4 or 5 initiated rulemakings. I do remember that. I would love to know what the timeline is on that. But I guess in my own thought process, we at a minimum need to affirm that if we feel this way, that the framework is correct. And I would be comfortable doing that. I don't think we have a model, but I think absolutely I'm comfortable saying the framework is right. That's the direction we need to head in. That being said, I also believe we need to move into a phase of, while we work on standards and assessments, engaging the accountability panel so we get this right, because while that initiated rulemaking is taking place, I think that gives us a chance to standards and to deal with the assessment component, run some statistical analysis to make sure the model's right. I think the worst thing we could do is get this wrong, put it out there, and everybody knows it's wrong, because there's so much frustration right now, and I understand that, and I think we owe it to teachers and students, primarily students, and their parents and communities to get it right. And I just wonder what is the harm in doing it that way, regardless of where that analysis came from. I came to the same conclusion when I read it last night. I just went, yeah, that's what I think already.
I see 2 things that we have an obligation to do. I mean, 2 things. One is that we are supposed to establish new accountability categories by November 15th. It's pretty clear that that's what we're supposed to do. And then the going forward part. You know, that we know we have work to do, and that things need to come back to the board, which is why I felt I worded the motion the way I did to go forth. The pieces that were sent out to last night are good recommendations in terms of coming back to the board and making sure that we've got a process by which we're working through the entire thing. It does recommend initiating rulemaking in January, giving time for statistical pieces that Sarah pointed out to be done. So we have 2 pieces. We have 2 pieces we need to do. I recognize, as a member of the board and a member of the panel, I think Steve may agree with me. I don't want to put words in his mouth.
If I may make a couple of comments. The panel was charged through an MOU to complete its task. The panel believes we did that, making that recommendation. And there's a reason I started out my words last Friday with team, talking about the educational team. And the educational team that the panel is recommending right now to continue and move forth on with is the State Board of Ed and the panel. And I think some members of the panel have hit it right on the head, and we have more work to do. And we have a framework that we have presented to the panel that follows the MOU. Those were our marching orders. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. In regards to PSAT, I couldn't come up with the term in my head. It's not a practice test. It is a test that determines national merit scholars. Commended scholars, then semifinalists, then finalists across the state of Indiana. So that's the purpose of the PSAT, part of the purpose, and we just wanted to add it to that since everybody's taking that now, sophomores are taking that now. It makes sense to add that as another point of emphasis and criteria to give students a chance, an additional chance to meet their needs for the CCR.
Yeah, Brad, you have a question for him?
Yeah, as you're responding, it triggered a question. So and this may be a question we need council's advice on, but with regard to our obligation, statutory obligation on this topic, are we, the motion seems to be that we would adopt every recommendation in the panel, and I'm comfortable with the majority of them. I'm similar to Sarah, I'm struggling on the expansion of the testing. But what I'm wondering is what we actually need to do statutorily is affirm the placement categories. Is that right? So is it possible we could affirm that part of it and still keep the process unfolding? I guess maybe we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, I think we are. So let me read the motion again, because I think we're right on sync, actually. So the first part of the motion says that State Board of Education adopts the Accountability System Review Panel's recommendations in establishing new accountability categories. Okay? The State Board of Education further recognizes that a validation and statistical analysis process may lead to follow-up recommendations by the panel to the board that support the categories as they are built and validated through the beta testing period. David.
I agree with Dr. Oliver. We're dealing with a system. A system contains aligned components. This motion I'm not in favor of because it sounds like we're starting to approve these things piecemeal. And I'm nervous that if we start to approve piecemeal this particular component as we move on in the system, we may want to go back and change it. However, the panel has done wonderful work, and the people who are part of it were just exemplary educators. And I feel we need to affirm that work. So I'd like to use the term conceptually confirm the report and the recommendations. I believe that would give us some flexibility as we look at some of the pilot testing, some of the other issues. The assessment is a huge component of this. Once we look at the assessment, we may want to go back and look at the categories. And I would argue we must go back and look at the categories. So I really feel that if we accept this motion, we're moving into a landmine here of a recommendation that we're not going to be able to live with once we do the testing. So I would urge someone on the board to make a motion using terms such as conceptually affirm the panel's recommendation, given the fact that our staff will be working with the panel, playing a leadership role in that, and I believe panel members are willing to also contribute in the future.
Let me kind of clarify, because in statute it says not later than November 15, 2013, the State Board shall establish new categories or designations of school performance under the requirements of this chapter. So the new categories of school improvement, in a nutshell, are the 90, 80, 70, 60, 100-point scale pieces. The statistical analysis in order to get schools into those categories still has to be done. And so we have to approve, I feel the board must approve, categories in some fashion at this meeting. But I understand we have to go further. You know, we have to say, and we further recognize that we need to do this. And Sarah, I think you're next.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
Sure.
In terms of what we are required to do today. I'm comfortable with us moving forward on the names of the categories. I'm comfortable with us moving forward on the scale that we might be using for the categories. I'm not at all comfortable yet. I think we're on our way there, but I don't have that hardline evidence yet to know that we've got it right. So my preference would be that we meet our statutory obligations today by going ahead and approving the names and the weights or the scale, but I'm not comfortable putting the other elements of the plan into a motion yet. I think we're close, and I definitely appreciate where we are. I'm not fully comfortable yet knowing that we don't have the evidence. I think there are too many question marks right now to put it in. And I get that you're saying it's a work in progress, but I can in good confidence make a vote today approving it.
So let me read the motion again, because I think we're all saying the same thing. Yes.
Have a paper copy in front of us.
I sent it to you. I don't know if you printed it out or if you have it on your laptop.
Of the motion itself?
That was sent out last night.
We have hard copy.
That was sent out last night.
Council.
I have an old one that we were working up. No.
Here's the
That
recommendation.
is not it. Yes. We need to pull up what was sent out last night.
Just my link isn't working, so I can't.
It's not
pull it up.
working. Do you guys have copies of it?
I'd appreciate it. 'cause
I don't
there's
have, I
I'm
don't
having
have
some kind of
a
problem.
copy of it
Why am I missing?
in addition. Yes, Troy?
First of all, Dr. Yeager and the panel has been commended for their work. I think what they have provided us is a vision and a mission of where we need to go. And we have talked a lot about having strategic planning and putting stuff in place. I think the panel has put the strategic planning in place. As a school administrator, we do that all the time in our schools for improvement. And then, as the process continues, you continue to refine and advise. I do have concerns with the assessment piece. I do have concerns still with the standards. But I think that as far as what was requested, we must support so we can move forward. And I really feel honored to say that is when I read that, I had the same concerns, but I wanted to make sure that the framework's in place. We've talked about strategic planning. This is strategic planning. And this process needs to be moved forward.
Brad?
Troy, I agree completely. I'm looking at the motion and I'm wondering what the reason I'm struggling with the motion is the way it's phrased makes it say that the State Board of Education adopts the accountability system or panel's recommendations, comma. And then it says establishing new accountability categories. But the statute's really just saying we got to establish the accountability categories. So here's what I'm wondering. If the motion actually just simply said at this point that the State Board of Education adopts the accountability systems review panel's recommendations for new accountability categories, why couldn't we act on that motion and leaving what remains there, which says there's going to be further recognition? It seems like that would achieve what the superintendent's trying to achieve, what you're expressing. My concern is if we adopt a motion that says we accept all the recommendations, we wake up tomorrow morning and find out we just expanded testing in ways we can't appreciate. So if we want to just simply get the categories done, I'm just wondering why we just don't say the State Board of Education adopts the accountability system review panel's recommendations for new accountability categories and let that be the motion.
I think that's what I said. So maybe I didn't.
It's slightly different because that comma really in the establishing throws it off because it makes it look like we're accepting all the recommendations. I'm heading there. I'm like you, Troy. I'm heading there, and I want to. I just want to know more information. So I'm just saying with the motion was simply the State Board of Ed adopts the accountability system review panel's recommendations for new accountability categories. No comma, just for that, clarifying that. Could that be the motion?
May I?
I'd like to call on the State Board of Education staff to help us with this language. We want to make sure that we get it right. This very important step that we're taking here today, and I'd like the input of our council as well as our staff to advise us specifically to the language so that we get it right.
There's also, I'm going to affirm that
Okay.
because there was a
Wait,
good
wait,
record. There was
wait,
some
wait,
good
wait,
material
wait,
given to
wait,
us
wait,
last
Dan.
night.
Dan,
And I'd
wait.
like to go through it. And so I agree with you on this. Very good idea. So we need their input.
Claire, I guess I'm going to recognize you.
Thank you.
It is a lot
Thank
to
you, Madam
digest.
Chair.
We got this very late last night, actually early this morning.
I think the conversation that I've heard, it reflects both what I hear the superintendent saying and other board members, that, and also what, as a member of the panel, I'm sure all the panel members would agree with me, that there was still a lot of work to do, and that these were accountability concepts, which is what the co-chairs talked about, and a general framework. There was still a lot of data analysis and validation with Indiana data, actual changes to the growth model to see what impact would this have, the recommendations have upon school letter grades. The panel talked about not wanting to end up with a system where every school was an F or every school was an A. So those are important conversations and work that still needs to occur. So just to clarify, I think we're saying essentially the same thing. The board would adopt the categories and agree to begin to do the significant work with our third-party experts that still needs to happen and come to the board in January with specific indicators, categories, and metrics to begin the formal rulemaking process. And then going through that process with public hearings and comment, et cetera, making adjustments, and then have that be in place by August. So the specific components of what I sent out late last night were recommended adjustments, 4 components. A phase 1, recommended adjustments to the model that reflect our current assessments, that would reflect growth to proficiency, as we talked about on the panel. These would be beta tested for our current school year and then go into effect for the 14-15 school year. Then phase 2, when the board standards and comes up with the assessments that will be in place for Indiana, there'll be some more work that has to take place. And part of what the panel talked about was having a vertical scale, so you could have growth data in different grades. That is still the conversation that needs to occur. But I agree with the comments of board members. That's a hard conversation to have in concept without determining what those assessments are. So that's more work that the panel has to do with the assistance of third-party experts. And then in addition, the dropout recovery high school accountability model was briefly addressed by the panel. Rules were adopted by this board in January. So those would have to be revisited to determine, does that still align with any future recommendations for the high school component? And then the special education accountability model that the legislature also required the board to adopt. There's lots of work to be done there as well.
So, Brad, I think your motion, I think making that change might make what we need to do okay. Yes.
Yeah. Essentially a friendly amendment. I agree completely with the first paragraph and the changes that were recommended there. I think I would be much more comfortable with it if we can look at the second paragraph and change the word may to will. So the State Board of Education further recognizes that validation and statistical analysis process will lead to follow-up recommendations instead of may. I think I'm more comfortable with that, knowing that we will be going back to it, and then also involving our State Board staff in just making sure that we're all managing the same information and making sure that.
So I was getting some clarification with some staff regarding the actual wording that you're looking at. So you made a formal motion?
I would move that it reads, the State Board of Education adopts the Accountability System Review Panel's recommendations for new accountability categories. The State Board of Education further recognizes that a validation and statistical analysis process will lead to follow-up recommendations to the formulas to support the categories as they are built and validated through the beta testing period of the new model design.
Second.
Would you mind if we add one more piece into that? Who the recommendations are going to come from? I think it's important that we say by the panel to the board.
I would like to speak to the motion here.
Okay. Oh, yeah, we're all going to speak to the motion.
If I may.
So
frankly,
wait a second. Wait just a second. I think I need to get myself into a frame of actually motion. So we have a motion. We have a motion that you've accepted an amendment. Okay. So we have a second, and so now we're in discussion.
Where are we on your? You just
And
mentioned the-
no, we're in discussion.
Okay.
So I'm suggesting that perhaps we may want to add by the panel to the board to make that work.
Is that part of the motion, or you're just saying?
We're just in discussion right now. I haven't said, hey, I want to amend. I'm just
Well,
putting
if
it
it's
out
seconded,
there.
That's the motion we're discussing. right?
Yes, we're discussing
But
this
you're-
motion.
Our staff has a lot of
Madam Chair, but your suggestion is not part of the motion, correct?
Not right now. I may
I just
do
wanted-
that in a minute. And now,
I would like
Gordon.
we're kind of, this is a very, very important resolution here today. And rather than kind of piecemeal the language here, it seems like many board members have some comments on the language. What I would like to do is propose that that we take just a short break and allow staff to actually write a resolution so that we can have a full resolution in front of us, and that we can make sure that we get it right.
I don't think it takes a full resolution, but it does take a motion.
No, we have you're making a motion to take a recess. Okay?
Well, I'm just commenting on the motion that's been made, and I would like to request that you withdraw the motion so that we can have a few minutes to make sure we get the language right, rather than, add a may or a shall or a here or there.
So let me clarify what the motion really is, okay? And everybody confirm, I believe we really just changed 2 words. So the State Board of Education adopts the Accountability System Review Panel's recommendations for new accountability categories. The State Board of Education further recognizes that a validation and statistical analysis process will lead to follow-up recommendations that support the categories as they are built and validated through the beta testing period for the new model design.
I'm comfortable putting the motion in abeyance in order to get it in writing, if that helps my colleague. I agree this is important, and I want to make sure we get the wording right. I need to ask procedurally how we would do that, but I don't see a problem. I think the motion, as we expressed it and it was seconded, is still on the table, but I agree. I think there's benefit in getting it right and making sure we have it right.
As the chair, I simply can call for a recess, and then we can come back. So we have a motion on the table, and we have a second. And so why don't my staff confer with the State Board of Ed staff to clarify and get down in writing the actual motion before we make a motion. Dan?
Thank you. Sarah brought up another point about the board has the responsibility to set this policy. So I think it's important to put in the motion the board staff's role here. And because we're going to have models and they're going to be tested, and to include the collaboration, obviously, the department. But I want it explicitly clear, because to get to the final decisions, you have to have models with some definition and run. One of the things we had from our report, Drew Sheldrick, is to make sure these are run. So I want that explicitly part of the motion, so there's no confusion about the board staff involvement. Thank you.
Just a clarification, as we begin to write all this, and perhaps Steve may want to speak to this, the panel was charged with doing the work and giving recommendations to you. And the panel is going to go forth and do the work and bring further recommendations to you. And Claire and Steve and I all serve on the panel, and all of these are represented from each of the groups that appointed people. So we're going to recess for a short bit and come back with a motion, perhaps, to suggest to you. And at that time, then, Brad, you can decide if you want to withdraw your motion. So we're going to be in recess for a short time. Let's try and be back here at 10 o'clock, 20 minutes. Steve. On the screen. So first of all, let me go through the motion for Brad. I can't read it though, Gordon. But Gordon, you may come over here and back of Sarah if you have good eyes. I need my glasses on. So Brad's initial motion is the following. The State Board of Education adopts the Accountability System Review Panel's recommendations for new accountability categories. The State Board of Education further recognizes that a validation and statistical analysis process will lead to follow-up recommendations to the formula that support the categories as they are built and validated through the testing period for the new model design. Here's a substitute motion, which we may want to substitute. So if you could scroll up. The State Board of Whoa, that's a little too big. The State Board of Education adopts the Accountability System. I'll just wait. The State Board of Education adopts the Accountability System Review Panel's recommendations for new accountability categories and affirms the panel's vision for the framework. Second paragraph. The State Board of Education further recognizes that a validation and statistical analysis process informed by technical experts regarding the indicators, formulas, and metrics that support the categories as they are built and validated through the beta testing period of the new model design. The work will lead to follow-up recommendations by the panel to the board. The last sentence was not agreed upon. It inserts that the board staff and department will collaborate with technical experts to inform the work of the panel and ultimately the board. And the reason for the disagreement is that the insertion of the board staff in this process or in this motion to actually do the work of what the motion is supposed to do. And it goes further to insert that. It is very clear that the panel is charged with the work that we're about to go do, and this just starts to put the CECI in the middle of some of this to actually inform the work that's going on. So we have a motion, Brad, and we have a second motion, and I think we probably need to have some dialogue on what we highlighted in yellow.
Let me ask a clarification question before I do anything on an amendment to the motion that's on the table. As I was thinking about this during the break, does this motion, and I'm asking council, does this motion constitute in any way a rule, either emergency or otherwise? I want to make sure that what we're voting on is actually accepting the categorical placements without creating a de facto rule. Do you understand what I'm asking, Michelle?
I do, and I think that, yes, this language achieves accepting and adopting the panel's categories, the scale, and the 90, 80, 70, 60 without being an emergency rule in and of itself.
And I want to follow up because I went back and looked at the actual statute. I don't see anything in the statute that says we have to adopt a rule by November 15th. It says we have to approve categorical placements, which is different in my mind than adopting a rule. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would agree with that. I do think that we need to certainly take this motion, this action regarding the panel's recommendation, again on the scale on the 90, 80, 70, 60. And again, I think that it was appropriately portrayed earlier about the vision and the framework with these caveats that we would do the work with experts to continue to flesh it out.
And I'd like to hold off on amending the motion until there's other discussions. I'm curious to hear.
I want to clarify something. We do have to have rulemaking done
right.
by November 2014.
That's right.
Correct. David, excuse me.
Does the motion say the adoption of the recommendations of the panel? Is that what both of those proposed motions say? I'm having trouble
The
saying
second one
this.
says the State Board of Education adopts the accountability system review panel's recommendations for new accountability categories and affirms the panel's vision for the framework.
So that would be just the categories and not
Yes.
all of the recommendations?
Yes, but going forward, it affirms the framework of the panel that the panel has set forth.
Would it give us the flexibility as we look at this entity as a system rather than pieces to go back and maybe make changes?
Yes, the second paragraph speaks to making further recommendations.
So we could go back on that first paragraph and make changes, even though we potentially will approve it today?
That would be done through the rulemaking process?
Yeah, but
No.
we're affirming the categories today. The 100-point scale, the 90, 80, 70, 60. That's what we're affirming today. That's what we're adopting today. That we want a 100-point scale, and the A, B, C, D, F is going to be in those categories that were outlined. The 90, 80, 70, 60.
And if we conduct these pilot tests and so forth, and then determine maybe that's not the right conceptual framework, does that tie our hands in going back and potentially making a change in that? Or are we making a change right now that will last?
David, I can speak to that. You're approving the categories, and the panel then is charged with doing the statistical work and the validation pieces to work within that 100-point framework of assigning the A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. Okay. So that's what the charge is, that we are adopting these categories, and now the work of the panel is to do the next steps in getting all the statistical pieces done to be within those categories. Sarah?
Can I just add one more thing? That really helps, and in the minutes, could that clarification be in there in case we need to go back. What you just said, Superintendent Ritz, was very good. I just want to be sure that conceptually what you said, I feel very comfortable with, that clarifies this particular motion for me.
Yes, it clarifies the actual accountability categories that we are adopting today.
And could it be part of the minutes of your interpretation that we
I'm
could-
sure it will be.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sure they're recording every word.
Congratulations.
Yes, Sarah?
Just for clarification, and I apologize for beating a dead horse here, I just want to be clear that I understand, because assuming Mr. Oliver would be willing to withdraw his motion, I would be able to support the revised motion, and I would appreciate the highlighted part to stay in there. I definitely feel more comfortable with that. I just want to be clear, if that is the route that we go, would the department be able to add in those early testing data indicators without coming back to the board at this point?
I don't know what your question is.
Would it if we were to add additional testing in the grade levels that don't currently have testing, that's kind of I know I've made it very clear that's my big issue here. Would the department have the authority, based on this approved motion, to add those indicators in without coming to the board first, or would the board have to have further?
The board approves all
discussions?
approves state assessments.
So I just want to make sure, because I know that it's in parts and there's
The answer
confusion.
would be no. That the board approves the standards and they also approve assessments.
Correct. So I just want to make sure that what we are approving today, if we go this route, that is a decision, it is conversation that would come back to the board.
Sarah, you are correct that the work of the panel at some point in the work of the board will involve assessments.
Okay.
You are correct. Brad?
One more question related to along those lines, but about the process. Before we took the break, you mentioned we had initiated the rulemaking process, I think back in August or September. We don't, according to statute, don't have to pass the rule until August of next year, I believe, right? Or excuse me, I may have that wrong. It's 2014 by which the rule has to be finalized, I believe. So not knowing legally how the initiated rulemaking process and the timelines, do we need to do anything related to initiating rulemaking? Because I'm assuming these kind of things Sarah's raising would be addressed in the rulemaking process.
Well, rulemaking process will begin so that we can get it completed. So we'll be backing up and working to actually get that timeline established.
Thank you. I would actually, would it be agreeable to accepting the amended language as provided by Superintendent Ritz, as it appears up there, including what's highlighted in yellow?
So we have a motion to substitute, and Sarah has seconded. Any more discussion? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Dan, do you have something you want to say?
I wanted to ask Claire a question.
I'm sorry, I just noticed that in the background, we made a run-on sentence. I think we're missing a couple words in that sentence. It says, further recognizes the validation, et cetera. I think we need to say something about must still occur or something like that. That seems to be missing from that sentence. We combined several sentences, and I think we're missing a few words. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, we need to correct it right now.
Yeah,
because we're
exactly.
getting ready to. It's right there.
The
It's under the
laptop's
cart.
under the cart.
Claire.
Oh, thank you.
Because I want to see
All
it.
right.
Real-time work. This is great.
I don't see what's missing, though.
Oh, so it's just affirming that testing for a new model design must occur. It has to happen. Yeah. Yes.
To the board.
And I'm comfortable with that addition. Sarah, are you okay with it? It's just more clear.
So now we're back. So Brad, are you wanting to substitute this motion for as revised, I guess?
As revised. Yes.
All right, Sarah, you're seconding the motion? Troy?
The yellow highlighted is still included, correct?
That was his motion.
Okay.
Discussion. Andrea?
Are we getting ready to vote simply on the motion to substitute, on the substance of the motion itself?
We're going to make a motion to substitute in a minute. I wanted to give anybody a chance to have dialogue about that. So he has a motion to substitute this. I have a second. and now we're having discussion about the motion to substitute.
Not the substance of the motion itself.
Correct, correct.
I want to ask a question.
BJ.
And I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but like I had a couple conversations with panel members. You know, Keith was one and Dr. Snap was one that were really helpful to me. I didn't know if it was appropriate now to ask them to maybe give some thoughts on where they were with the panel, if now is the time to do that.
Well, I believe we're just approving categories and not talking about where we're going further. I prefer not to, so we can get the motion done. Is there any discussion on the motion to substitute? All right, let's take, I guess we're not really taking an action yet. Actually, we're just a motion to substitute. So all those in favor of substituting the motion for this signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries to substitute. So now we are actually on discussion on the main motion. So any discussion on the motion as it stands? Yes, Andrea.
I'd like to speak against the motion. As a former journalist, I understand the importance of meeting deadlines, but the deadline set in HCA 1427 for approving new school performance categories is unreasonable. It forces us to put the cart before the horse. Under HCA 1427, school performance categories must be based on a measurement of individual student academic performance and growth to proficiency. Proficiency at what? As of today, we do not know what academic proficiency standards we will be using when the categories take effect. Will they be the Common Core, our previous standards, other model standards, or some unique Indiana hybrid? We also have no idea what standardized assessment we will use to judge proficiency. Will it be PARCC, Smarter Balanced, some new generation of ISTEP, or something else? How can we approve an accountability framework before we know to what standards schools and teachers will be held accountable? The proper sequence should be the reverse. We need to determine first, what do we want our students to learn? Next, what curriculum best transmits that knowledge? 3, how do we teach it effectively? 4, how do we test students to see if they've learned it? And then and only then, how do we hold schools accountable for results? In recent months, Hoosiers have voiced deep opposition to the Common Core standards currently in effect. These standards have been judged by experts to be inferior to our previous standards. They are not internationally benchmarked nor research-based. They are filled with meaningless jargon, as shown by the mind-numbing reference to the phrase college and career ready. Are these the standards we will use to judge proficiency? Across Indiana, teachers have complained that the joy has been sucked out of their classrooms by the relentless teaching to the test, which this A to F model will certainly exacerbate. Teachers tell me they no longer teach what is not tested. At the last meeting, one of the last comments made by Superintendent Ritz were in the mode of teaching to the test, pure and simple. And yet we don't even know which new test they will be teaching to. As an aside, there's been this apparent wrestling match discussed in the media over who controls education policy in the state of Indiana. Is it Governor Pence and the state board, or is it the Department of Ed? I would submit the federal government controls education policy, certainly the procedures and processes that we follow meeting after meeting, and the College Board is determining the content we teach. I oppose an A to F model that down the road may award grades to schools and performance pay to teachers, potentially, based on their adherence to the Common Core standards currently in place and on an as yet undetermined assessment aligned to those standards.
Thank you. Any more discussion? I will call for the roll.
I'll just say to Andrea that ironically, when you even said the cart before the horse at school with some other colleagues, that's exactly the phrase that we were using, that the cart's before the horse. And I think the panel, I don't want to speak for Dr. Snap, he's shaking his head yes, and we had asked, BJ asked if he could come up and we were told no, but they themselves, when I talked to panel members, kind of said the same thing, the cart's before the horse. But what we're approving today is just the 90, 80, 70, 60, and the A, B, C, D, E, F. And so we're approving nothing else. And so that will give us the opportunity to discuss all of the things that you're concerned about, because Dr. Snap's concerned about it, I'm concerned about it, the teachers out there watching are concerned about it. And so I want us all to be a part of that discussion that's ongoing, that we are just approving those placement of categories. And I don't know that that reassures you completely, but I want you to know you are absolutely not alone in your concerns.
And the panel did quite frequently, talk about assessments, haven't been decided yet. But the framework that's proposed as itself, as a framework, whatever the assessments are, when we actually get to that point, it can accommodate a change in assessment. So that became our primary goal, to make sure that we were building a framework that wasn't dependent upon our specific kind of assessment, because we knew we had to wrestle with all of that. Brad?
I think I was just going to ask Dr. Yeager just to affirm. Last time we met, I believe the categorical placements that were also based on national research that the panel looked at and how other states were doing it. So, I mean, I agree with everything that my colleague is saying, and I think Carrie framed it really well, too, that we want to, this is not taken away from the fact we want to have input into the process with the panel, but the category placements themselves do have a research base to support why the panel recommended that.
That's correct, Dr. Oliver. We looked at, I believe, 38 states, is that correct? In their work, so we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. We tried to maybe amend the work of some other states to create an Indiana hybrid, which is exactly what we hope to end up with.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Troy Albert,
Yes.
Dan Osmer,
Yes.
David Freya,
Yes.
Gordon Hendry,
Yes.
Andrea Neal,
No.
Sarah O'Brien,
Yes.
Fred Oliver,
Yes.
Tony Walker, absent, BJ Watt,
Yes.
Terry Wicker,
Yes.
Superintendent Rose.
Yes.
8 to 2.
8 to 2.
To 1, I'm sorry, 9 to 1.
Excuse me, we had one abstain. 9 to 1. 9 to 1. Correct, 9 to 1. We have one person abstain and one person absent. All right. I corrected myself, not abstain, absent. We are on to new business item B, resolution regarding prior board members. You received the resolutions.
Second.
Could we please wait for me to ask for a motion and go through proper channels, please? So do I have a motion to approve the resolution recognizing prior board members?
Approval?
Second.
Do we have any discussion? Roll call, please.
Troy Albert,
Yes.
Dan Osmer,
Yes.
David Freya,
Yes.
Gordon Hendry,
Yes.
Andrea Neal,
Yes.
Sarah O'Brien,
Yes.
Fred Oliver,
Yes.
Tony Walker is absent,
Sorry.
BJ Watt,
Yes, I apologize.
Terry Wicker,
Yes.
Superintendent Rose.
Yes. 10-0. New business action item, letter C, revised HEA 1005 remediation guidance. Danielle Shockey, I believe you have a brief presentation.
I do, and thank you, Superintendent Fritz. And I also, before I start, I want to acknowledge several people that have worked on this guidance. This has been a very collaborative effort, including Dan Clark from the Governor's Agency CECI Education Roundtable, Sarah Ansell from the Commission of Higher Ed, Dr. Leslie Fadum from the Indiana Department of Education, Scott Sanders from the Department of Workforce Development, Amy Horton, Department of Education, Michelle Walker, Indiana Department of Education, James Bentley, the Governor's Agency CECI, Amanda Culhan, Indiana Department of Education, Josh Schlakey from the Governor's CECI, Marie McIntosh from the Department of Workforce Development, and Sam Sneidman from the Commission of Higher Ed. And I want to thank all of them for their diligent online, face-to-face work as we redeveloped, given the direction of the Education Roundtable and Representative Claire Baining. I'd also like to thank Tricia Rayner from College Board, who's in the audience, and she's available for any questions that the State Board may have today regarding the addition of the PSAT as an indicator for the students who may be added to taking the AccuPlacer exam this spring still, this winter actually. So at any time, Tricia's available, as well as Michelle Walker, Amanda Culhan, and Dr. Leslie Fadum to come to the podium. You received a couple handouts. I just want to draw your attention to make sure you know why you were given them. They're not necessarily part of the presentation, but rather background information. You received an AccuPlacer overview at your seat today. And then you also received Targeted Intervention Produces Gains in Student Achievement, also a document regarding the AccuPlacer. And then when you received your original board packet for today, you received a highlighted version of the proposed changes to the interim guidance. I want to point out that the proposed changes do not substantially change the need for study. All the persons represented on the first screen said there are many items left to be answered around parts of 1005 for which the DWD, the CHE, and the Department of Education want to study further, based on the pilot and based on the work of the cut scores set by higher ed and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we still want to study. So we're not coming back to you to reopen the entire interim guidance. Rather, we're coming back to you to ask you to reopen and approve a new standard of identification of students who will be eligible to take the AccuPlacer yet this winter. The impetus for that was at the Education Roundtable meeting on 9/25, which was the first Education Roundtable meeting in over a year and a half. So it was the first opportunity, honestly, for them to have dialogue about it. It was brought up that really in the spirit of 1005, it was to capture students who may not be college and career ready and provide for the schools more diagnostic information for them to be able to receive intervention. So they asked that in that spirit, would we be willing to expand the pool of students? If you remember our initial guidance, we were using the pool of students who had failed their ECA exams more than one time. They felt like that was too limiting for the schools for this diagnostic exam, and they proposed, and specifically Representative Baining and Claire met with the Department of Education staff and proposed that we would consider using the PSAT as an additional indicator. So our collective body came together. We looked at cut scores of PSATs at the institutions of higher learning in the community schools of Ivy Tech and Vincennes, and meeting with the College Board to determine best practices. And it was deemed that the score of 46 on a PSAT is what is a benchmark for being college and career ready, and those students typically, if they have scores beyond 46, do not need remediation. So any score 46 or below would be a good indicator to the high schools that they may want to provide greater intervention for these students. And I want to just have the caveat here that schools are already required by statute to provide intervention and remediation for students failing their ECA exams. So just want to note that this doesn't disregard that fact. This adds to that fact that we recognize they may need intervention to be college and career ready. So this is the grid in your proposed new interim guidance that essentially is the biggest part of the change that we would like your approval on today as the revised interim guidance. Any questions on this? This is, I think, again, like I said, it's the most substantive change we're requesting today. You may have questions about how this is going to happen, so let me go to the next slide to talk about the timeline. Also important to note, the PSAT was just taken a month ago, and scores go to schools in December. So this timeline is really can't be moved much quicker because schools don't have their students' PSAT scores yet. So given that, we would offer 3 training formats, or I should say the College Board will offer 3 training formats, because essentially this is going to impact every high school in the state of Indiana. They may have 1 student falls in this category, or they might have 10 students or 100 students. So we cannot discount any school in the needing of a training, and the training requires for a hands-on coordinator at each of the locations. So they will offer hands-on training in regional locations and the dates that you see here on the screen. They will also offer live webinars that will be follow-up to the hands-on training, and then recorded webinars for anybody who needs follow-up access. The assessments then can be offered once the person is trained on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, essentially in a proctored setting, and then schools can begin their diagnostic AccuPlacer assessment at any time once their coordinator is trained. The intervention, that will be up to the school. They can decide to go ahead and do interventions immediately if their schedule so allows, or they may decide to build this into the student's schedule if they're a current 10th grader or 11th grader into their schedule for next school year. So they will, again, the results are given immediately. I just want to pause here. Any questions up to this point? So I don't know if you need to give some language to what I'm actually asking for, because ultimately what we're asking for is for you to approve the proposed changes to the interim guidance. Yes, Troy.
Concern that I guess I have is with it being implemented right now, is there any funds to go with that? because, the training is going to be costly.
The Department of Education is paying for that training.
And the second thing is, due to the fact that we've already have our schedules in place to implement this spring, would be very difficult in most schools to adjust those schedules to accommodate those students.
I absolutely respect that, and honestly, that was originally our reason for not moving this aggressively, if you will, with this change for schools, was for your exact concerns. However, again, when Representative Boehning and Claire asked for us to reopen this and felt very strongly that if we didn't, we would miss certain students who needed intervention, that we felt like we needed to act upon that and bring it forth to you. They actually specifically requested that you reopen this interim guidance. The request came to the State Board of Education. So I guess I understand, I hear your concern, but also respectfully request that this is what they've asked you to consider. And to your question about funding, the actual assessment itself and the training will be paid for by the Department of Education.
But you are absolutely correct. There's no funding for any remediation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Is there enough flexibility in here to get, you're the high school principal among us.
I will tell you, it will be one of those things that once we identify who they are, but what about a student in that cohort that has no intention of going to college? Are they taken out of that cohort because that would determine the numbers? You could have as many as 35% of your juniors and seniors that may qualify for this expansion type things, and I think that would be a real concern if I...
Correct. I want to point your attention to page 3 of the recommendation, and the highlighted first paragraph reads this way, and Troy, this may be help to Dan's point. A student may be waived from the additional diagnostic assessment if the school has already identified the need for early intervention through lack of progress towards fulfillment of a student's graduation plan, evidenced by a did not pass on Algebra 1 or English end of course exams, and has placed the students in remediation and has data to support that the student is on target for fulfillment of graduation plans and readiness for college and career ready. I would read that if you have a student who is on a track that is not towards college, and the high school has that identified in their grad plan, and then you have them on a course to succeed in all the ways you have them set out to succeed, I feel like this gives you the option to make wise school level decisions.
I would also say that if a student was has opted out to a general diploma, that they not be included in that also. Mm-hmm. Because schools have already gone through that process with parents' meetings and determined that the Core 40 diploma track was not appropriate at that time.
Mm-hmm. Troy, wouldn't that all already be indicated in their graduation plan?
Sometimes. It's not clear on that because some kids can come back if, say, their senior year, they turn it on, and they can go back and become a Core 40 graduate if they are in the right classes. And they may not qualify in some of those testing areas, and they may not have taken the PSAT. Because right now, I can tell you, I know the state pays for all sophomores to take it. I will tell you this, I know that I do not give it to every 10th grader that's eligible to take it. I give it to the students that want to take it and are college bound and want to have that assessment. It is not, we give it to the juniors because it helps them qualify for scholarships.
Well, it certainly was the intent of the department to not test for testing's sake. That's why that paragraph's there.
Correct. And I agree. I think that helps in that and gives a little leeway, but it's going to need a lot of, I hate to say this, Danielle, it's going to need a lot more. We're going to have to test to see how many kids there are. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to do that pilot and have a little bit more data so that we can make those decisions.
Absolutely, and I would say everything we're proposing here in this grid and the opportunity for schools to waive out given this option, all of this remains what we'd like to bring back to the board in April to say this is what we've learned through this process in addition to those other study indicators that are on page 4 and 5 of this. So I guess we're not suggesting that this is going to be the ongoing final answer on this. Rather, this is a chance to say, okay, let's open it up. let's capture these additional students, let's talk to schools about the intervention they were able to provide, did it make a difference, and then come back to the board in April with more final recommendations for 10.05. And I think even field guidance, I think, we'll play with the FAQs that need to follow this to schools to say how you can, because we also go on to say that ongoing family commitment and communication is imperative around all of this. So if I were in a principal's shoes like you are in this position, I would say, have I informed the parents? Are they well aware of the track my student is on? Are they well aware that they have this option and that they may choose to opt out of this additional diagnostic assessment because my child is on a pathway that they've already determined? And you've done that in a system that maybe it's not identified on their grad plan, but so I would say that you'd probably have to have one documentation of that.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, and it was the intent of the parties from the very beginning that we study all of this. Even Accuplacer as the test
Correct.
is not necessarily, the part that may move forward. So we recognize your concerns wholeheartedly. They were expressed also at the roundtable.
Okay. So at this time, Superintendent, I don't know, my very last slide is just really to inform the board, as I also promised, that I would bring them up to speed monthly on the timeline on 10.05. So the next slide is really outside of the recommendation. So I don't know if there's a motion to approve the new interim guidance with the highlighted changes.
Why don't you finish your presentation,
Okay.
then I'll submit the motion.
Very good, thank you. So like I said, finally, this last slide is just indicating to all of you that really where we actually are meeting monthly. I know originally on my timeline I said we would meet every other month, but we've gone ahead and moved that a little bit quicker pace given the work that we need to do.